There is a beautiful word given in the prophet Amos. And it says this, Amos 5, verse 24, "But let justice roll down like waters, and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream." And as we hear that word, I doubt that many of us are not uplifted by it. We feel the passion and the joy of the commitment that justice will come on the earth. That what is wrong will not always be wrong. Justice, we feel, will be overcome even when it lies beyond our hands, beyond what we can do, maybe even beyond what we can comprehend or think. Amos speaks of the promise that is at the core and the heart of God's relationship with us, one that is founded in Jesus' cross and resurrection, that our ending lies in justice and not in injustice. But what does that look like? For us, what does justice rolling down like waters, righteousness like an ever-flowing stream, look like in the world that we are living in? What are the words and images that we use to speak of that justice? What does justice look like for us where we are now? There is a starkness to this question that it's possible to bring out through the descriptions of horror and terror in the Russian-occupied areas of Ukraine at the moment. A woman called Tetiana Boykiv was with her husband, Mykola Moroz, in the basement of their house in Ozera. And Russian soldiers found them, questioned Mykola about his phone. They put a bag over his head, over the head of this man that his newlywed wife called her big, big love, and took him away to shoot him. They had met in a church outing for single people. Mykola collected small, beautiful things, stones, postcards, pieces of glass, and before dawn each day he would bring Tetiana fresh flowers from the field at the back of their house. A priest tried to document bodies in a village an hour north of Kyiv as the Russians dumped them. Amongst those bodies was that of Mykola, tortured, dead. And it's hard to read of the journey that Tetiana took to bring her husband's body back to be buried. Against such injustice and horror, she seeks closer from a judge that she feels she can trust, God. She says if they manage to avoid court and trial here in Ukraine, they will be judged by God. What does that look like? That justice by God in the world that we find ourselves, what does that look like? What does justice rolling down like waters look like here? When we read the words or the vision in chapter 14, 6 to 13, the immediate reaction is one of horror. What's going on here? How is there gospel in this, good news in this? How do we hear this vision alongside the promise of the cross, alongside the one who dies for us in our sins that we might know forgiveness and grace and love? How do we hold together this vision with all that gives us life? Many of us will simply say, it's in God's hands. The God of righteousness, of justice, of covenant love, of mercy, will do right. Justice will come, even if it lies beyond me. And for me, the cross and the resurrection of Jesus are together the promise that justice is coming. That promise of the waters coming, of the streams of righteousness flowing. Justice will come. But I've rarely asked in any concrete terms, what does that look like for me? How do I speak of justice coming? And this is the step that John takes in the vision. He speaks of what that justice of God looks like as it comes to him. And he does it for a reason and in language and symbols that are of the moment and of the context. I'm not going to pretend that this vision doesn't shock. It does. But it is vision and symbol, and the writing intends to do something to those who hear. Particularly do something for those that he's writing to in the letters at the beginning of Revelation. Why does John speak of the justice that is coming in these concrete and specific and horrific ways? What is the vision doing? And here we need to tread carefully. For many of us, our lives have carried little of actual horror, of death being close, of terror alongside us. We live lives that are often removed from brutality and the immediacy of war. Our lives maybe touch these things, but it's not constant in our lives. I will often listen to a BBC audio podcast called In Our Time. I know others will listen to that as well. Melvin Bragg discusses with those who know things, particular social, cultural, historical, and scientific events or persons. I think it is the best thing I listen to in a week often. And this week, with Armistice Remembrance events coming up, they were discussing the poems of Wilfred Owen, who's a war poet from the First World War. Died 4 days before the end of the war in November 1918. And he wrote some of those startling war poems. They kind of grip you. They draw out the starkness of pain and loss. And one of those speaking shared the approach taken by Owen in war. He says, more or less, this is summarizing it: I've seen much beauty in the horror of war, but you who are outside the experience cannot perceive it. We are not allowed to be consoled by the vision of the beauty. It belongs to those who share in the suffering with him. And it seems to me that in approaching this part of the vision in John, what John is giving us here intends towards the consoling and encouraging of those who are suffering with him in it. We read it from the wrong place. There is another word of appalling violence that maybe helps us here. In Psalm 137, the psalmist, along with many others, has been taken violently from Jerusalem to Babylon. And in 137, it starts with this beautiful song. By the rivers of Babylon we sat and wept when we remembered Zion. There in the poplars we hung our harps in the trees. There our captors asked us for songs, our tormentors demanded songs of joy, and they said, sing us one of the songs of Zion. But he says, how can we sing the songs of the Lord when we're in a foreign place? And the psalmist pictures them unable to sing, separated from home, from the land they know, having witnessed the violence and the death of friends or family. How can they sing in that place? And we can maybe put ourselves there. There are times when I look at the world. I look at decisions taken, of violence enacted. I look at pride and hatred and the damage to people, from the madness of the war in Ukraine to the small moments of someone dying in their home because of heat. And there are no words that come. Sometimes when you look at these things, when you face these things, you don't know how to sing. There is a numbness. But there are times also that I know when I think of someone like Nicola Mores and what justice should look like for someone who did this against him. I know the violence of my own heart. And very clear pictures come of what I would want to do. And the psalmist in 137 goes through the same. When he feels suddenly, what he feels suddenly, it bursts out in horrific pictures. Daughter of Babylon, he says at the end of that psalm, happy is the one who seizes your infants and dashes them against the rocks, he writes. Utterly horrific. But these words are not to be understood as telling us what to do, but describing what exile and violence feels like. There is an honesty to it. God is not afraid of our emotions. We just need to bring them, as the psalmist does, to God, because he is the healer of what is damaged and broken and hurting. And in John's vision in 14, there is something similar going on. This vision, he says, is calling for patient endurance, verse 12, for God's people in the face of violence and death and suffering. These things will happen to you if you keep witnessing to Jesus. And John is in exile because he is witnessing to Jesus. And he's saying, if we're not sharing in the suffering with John, we need to be careful how we condemn his words within the vision. So what do these three angels bring to us in this part of the vision if we seek to share in the suffering? There's too many S's in that one. If we seek to share in the suffering of Jesus and listen for the beauty, what do these three angels bring us? Angel 1. Verse 6, the first angel brings a word of good news, evangelion, a word of good news that is spoken to everyone. The invitation is simple. Worship God, the one who made you, and all that lies around you. Worship. this one who made you in all your startling wonderfulness. Worship the one who made you. This proclamation of good news has no limit to it. It is to all, it is eternal, it is for all time. Worship the God who made the glory of what lies around you, the one who made you in all your astonishing wonder. It's a constant, eternal good news that keeps going out and keeps going out. Worship the one who made you, what lies around you. Keep hearing that invitation. Just looking at that picture up there of the front garden with the sun coming through. I think it was Alison that took that picture, probably. I think it was. It's beautiful. Isn't that beautiful? Look at the wonder of that picture. And God made that. Come to worship the one who can make such startling beauty. There is something in that causes to sing with the psalmist, I praise you because I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Your works are wonderful in Psalm 139. The second angel now brings in the proclamation that Babylon, the symbol here for Rome and all it means, that Babylon is fallen. Now, this will not feel like it in the cities and towns where John is speaking to. The power of Rome just still holds over each person that John is speaking to. This second angel speaks a truth that is seen in the resurrection of Jesus, that victory over death and the powers of the world. Resurrection has dealt with that, but it's a truth that is not yet fully known. John is writing to those who are living to this truth and witness, but they don't see it around them yet. The world still doesn't feel like God has won at times. Babylon can still very much feel like it's in control of things. They are in the wilderness of chapter 12, in the outer courts of chapter 11, where the dragon remains rampant and violent. We are approaching November with all its talk of remembrance and the sadness of war and loss and the commitments to another way. Remember hearing the song, I Vow to Thee, My Country, sung by a fragile single voice a few years back. And for the first time, I understood it not in these high patriotic brass band type terms of flags and things, but as one who sings, being held in a commitment to another city. A city that is not of this world. That single voice sang this, there is another country I've heard of long ago, dear to them that love her, most great to them that know. We may not count our armies, we may not see our king. Her fortress is a faithful heart, her pride is suffering. And soul by soul and silently her shining bounds increase. And her ways are ways of gentleness, and all her paths are peace. There is another city that we hold to. And the later chapters of Revelation will open up that city to us. And Paul speaks of our belonging to that city. Our citizenship is in heaven. We are held together in love that comes from God. And John in this vision sees the second angel declaring that what lies around us that seems to have so much power has fallen. Our citizenship is not of Babylon, of the Rome that lies around. That has fallen. We are citizens of a different country, of a different city, the New Jerusalem. But the work of the vision is now to encourage us to make decisions in what we do as those who are of that city. Because for those that John is speaking to, it does not feel like Rome or Babylon has fallen. For Tatiana and Ozera in Ukraine, it does not look like Babylon has fallen. What words can be given to give strength to walk in the wilderness? It is this sort of word, that justice is coming. That justice will roll down like water, righteousness like an ever-flowing stream. That justice will come for you. John keeps asking us, calling us to be witnesses. The culminating call of chapter 11 is to be witnesses in the outer courts. Chapters 12 and 13 about being witnesses in places that are hard and difficult. There is a call there about sharing through witness in the suffering of Christ. Paul puts it powerfully in Romans 8. If we are children, we are heirs of God, co-heirs with Christ, if we share in the sufferings so that we might share in his glory. John writes to those who are already sharing in the suffering of Christ. From the letters, we know that some are struggling to stay with it. He writes to them to know that it is worth staying with it, because justice will come against the injustice and suffering that they're facing as witnesses. They are thinking, is this worth it? The vision is saying this is worth it. Justice It's coming. And this is the context where we come to the third angel who speaks in a loud voice with these horrific images. And it's here that we need to tread carefully in the suffering of John and the people that he is speaking to. John could see the horrific torture and violence that will take place against those who witness to Jesus. For those who'd been in Rome in the late 60s under Nero, a few years before John writes, they'd have seen Christians nailed to trees, publicly burned alive and shamed as human torches. When we speak of justice coming, what pictures do we make for that? What does it look like for us? For John, what that looks like in the symbols and language and experience that lie to hand for him, justice looks like those who enacted such horror will face worse. Burning for longer and more public shaming before God, they will face worse. Like Psalm 137, there is a passionate response to the world around him where we can see the passion, but maybe we struggle with the same symbols and language that John is using here. But the call to endure and witness comes because whatever justice looks like for us, whatever pictures or language he used to describe it, we want to stand on the right side of justice. We want to know that justice will mean something. I don't know what justice rolling down like waters or righteousness like an ever-flowing stream. I don't know what that looks like where I stand. I'm much more hesitant to nail down what that looks like for me and for us. I will speak much more readily, along with Tetiana in Ukraine, that justice lies with God without speaking in detail. But John's declaration in his vision challenges me. If there is no justice, what's the point of witnessing? What does justice look like where I stand? John's words are to a people struggling. He tells them, justice will come. The suffering and the violence that you face as witnesses will be judged, and it does matter. That is the call that I've heard in John's vision, difficult and hard though it is, horrific in places. If we stand in John's suffering, share in the sufferings of the world, maybe we too will see the beauty that lies in committing to God's justice holding over all things, even if we cannot find the words to say it or speak it. God's justice holding over all things, and that we witness to that in love. Shall we pray?